Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Laura, this is Culture Nonsense, and yes, it is cold, it is winter, I'm freezing, so I'm gonna try to wrap this video up relatively shortly. We don't have that much to talk about today. I just wanted to do a video further breaking down the counts against Elizabeth Holmes and exactly what she was found guilty of, what she was found not guilty of, and what the jury couldn't really come to a decision on, and then further discuss a little bit where we go from here. So if we take a step back and look at this indictment in terms of two big buckets of where the charges fall, you have the charges against the investors and the charges against the patients. So Elizabeth was found not guilty on all of the charges that had to do with the patients. Now, wire fraud itself can be involved with using electronic communication, such as emails, to get money from people. And one of the reasons why Elizabeth was not convicted on all of the counts with the patients was because she was kind of one step removed from them. She didn't directly, speak to patients. She did not have direct involvements with them. And the jury found this compelling because it wasn't like she was specifically going to patients and telling them to use her devices. So you might think that if she was not convicted on the charges about the patients, she might have been convicted with all the charges against the investors. However, this is not the case. She was found guilty on 4 counts. I believe I accidentally said 3 in my last video, but it was 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. However, the jury also couldn't come to a decision on 3 of the counts. The first count that she was found guilty on involved conspiracy to commit wire fraud against Theranos investors, and this charge specifically was surrounding knowingly and intentionally soliciting payments from investors with false statements about Theranos' technology, its business partnerships, and its financial model. The second guilty count of wire fraud was in connection to a 2014 investment of $38,336,632 made by PMF Health Sciences of San Francisco. Brian Grossman, PMF's chief investment officer, said his team was told the startup had brought in more than $200 million in revenue, mostly from the Department of Defense. Theranos' former head of accounting testified earlier that 2011 revenue came in at $518,000, and that the company had no revenue in 2012 or 2013. The third guilty count, this was of wire fraud, was in connection to an October 2014 investment of $99,999,984 made by a firm associated with the family of former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Investment manager Lisa Peterson testified that Holmes claimed Theranos' technology was in use on military helicopters and sent a report with a Pfizer logo touting the superior performance and accuracy of Theranos' machines. The logo and follow-up questioning, Peterson said, led her to conclude that the report was prepared by Pfizer, which was false. And the last guilty count of wire fraud was in connection with an October 2014 investment of $5,999,997 from a company involving Daniel Mosley, a longtime lawyer for former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Mosley testified that he also was led to believe Pfizer had approved Theranos' technology. In a letter to Kissinger, he called the report the most extensive evidence supplied regarding the reliability of the Theranos technology and its applications. So I believe if we look at the context surrounding some of these things, it's specifically what investors found compelling that led them to invest money. So we have the forged Pfizer documents, the revenue projections. I think these were some of the things that the jury looked at and said, for sure, we think that she was lying about these things, therefore she defrauded people. However, with the counts that they couldn't come to a decision on, some people thought there was evidence to suggest that she was guilty, other people thought the evidence was not strong enough to convict. And these things had to do specifically with things like Theranos' military technology or the use of their technology in the military. So the first no verdict count of wire fraud involved Theranos investor Alan Eisenman, a retired Texas money manager who put $1.1 million into Theranos. Eisenman said Holmes led him to believe that this was a company that had proven itself successful and that he grew frustrated by her unwillingness to provide solid information about Theranos. Whatever went on in his testimony, apparently the jurors did not believe there was enough solid evidence to convict Elizabeth Holmes of fraud. The second no verdict wire fraud count was in connection with a $5,349,900 investment from Black Diamond Ventures, a Los Angeles-based venture capital firm. Managing director Christopher Lucas testified that Holmes told him her startup's blood analyzers were being used to treat soldiers in the battlefield, which was false. And finally, the last no verdict count of wire fraud was in connection with a 2013 investment of $4,875,000 from the Hall Group, a Texas investment firm. In this, Brian Tolbert, vice president of finance, testified that Holmes claimed that Theranos' technology could run any combination of lab tests from tiny blood samples, and this persuaded the Hall Group. Instead, Theranos often relied, as we know, on vein-drawn blood rather than its touted fingerstick droplets, and its own machines could run on only a dozen tests of often dubious accuracy. So all of the things that I just mentioned in these counts were issues that jurors got stuck on, not really knowing if there was enough evidence to convict. One of these things, like I mentioned specifically, were the claims about the military, and this is why the jury asked to hear those recorded conversations that Elizabeth had with investors. She talked a lot in those clips about the use of military and other uses for Theranos' technology, and there's actually an interview with one of the jurors where he talked about how her language was very careful, and for him and some other people, this led him to think that she was guilty because he believed, or some of the jurors may have believed, that she was purposefully dancing around these things and purposefully being very careful with her language to potentially misconstrue the truth. However, other people thought she was just talking in the future tense, not because she was being careful, but because she really was talking about things that were hopefully possible in the future. The jury also didn't find Elizabeth Holmes to be a very credible witness. They had a ranking for each of the people that testified, with 1 being not credible at all and 4 being very credible, and Elizabeth Holmes ranked a 2. No one ranked a 1, so she was pretty much the least credible person in terms of testimony that the jury saw, which is pretty interesting. So now that we know what she was convicted of, what's going to happen next? I've heard that Sunny's trial has been pushed back to February 15th, which is a little bit unfortunate, but you know, these things happen with scheduling. And we've also been told that the judge is going to postpone any sentencing for Elizabeth until after Sunny's trial. So it's going to be a while. Sorry, I had some technical issues for a minute, so I had to turn off the camera, and I hope the frame looks similar to what it was before. Anyway, now looking ahead to Sunny's trial being postponed, we will not have any type of Elizabeth sentencing until after the end of Sunny's trial. The judge has said that he's not going to do her sentencing until all of that litigation is wrapped up. So there are a couple options for what could happen from here. Either Elizabeth will appeal her conviction on those 4 counts, or less likely, in my opinion, she could take some type of plea with the government and help them in their case against Sunny. So essentially, I don't know if she would be commuting her time, maybe getting a charge knocked off, maybe having some fines knocked off, something essentially to lessen her sentence in exchange for helping the government with their case against Sunny Balwani. Personally, I don't think she would do this because she's really been dead set in her stance on I'm innocent, I did nothing wrong, and to a certain extent, she seems to have some personal delusions about herself. So personally, I don't see there being any way that she could kind of admit to any wrongdoing because she just doesn't think she did anything wrong. The other thing people have been wondering about are what happens to these 3 counts where there's no verdict on them. The judge is going to rule on them shortly. What could happen is that there's, a retrial for these 3 counts, or he'll probably just dismiss them because Elizabeth has already been convicted on 4 counts. And usually with cases like this, each of these counts, the time is served concurrently. So she probably wouldn't be serving any more time if, she was able to go back and have another trial and get convicted on these 3 counts. She'd just have to be paying more fines probably. And since the jury couldn't come to a decision on the first place, it would probably be pretty difficult for them to come to a consensus in a new trial about these 3 counts. So they'll probably just be pushed aside. The prosecution got its conviction. That's all they're probably going to care about. Sonny's trial is probably going to be pretty difficult for him because the prosecution has now gone through a trial and they have a lot of opportunities to fix any mistakes that they might have made. When you are in a jury at the end of the trial, you have the opportunity to talk to the attorneys, both prosecution and defense, and they can ask you, what you found compelling, what you didn't like, what mistakes you think were made, so that they can learn from the experience. They're technically not allowed to come up to you. You have to go over to them. When I was in a jury, this happened. I think we were leaving the courtroom, we went down this escalator, and all the attorneys were just standing there waiting patiently to see if anyone would come over and talk to them. So if any of the jurors did tell the attorneys what they found compelling or what they didn't like, the attorneys now have a chance, in the prosecution at least, for Sonny's trial to fix any of the mistakes they might have made. Furthermore, they already proved that they could get a conviction on 4 of these charges, so it'll probably be relatively easy for them to duplicate this with Sonny. If I were him, I would be a little worried for the trial. You kind of don't want to go second because it paints a narrative about the whole thing. Elizabeth got to set the tone, and he has to respond to it. That's all I have for you today. Let me know what you think about the verdict in the comments. If you have any further questions or concerns, anything that was confusing. I know in a lot of articles, they just completely skip over any context for any of these counts. Or if I got anything wrong, feel free to correct me as well. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.